Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Overcoming the Hidden Costs of Spreadsheet-based Inventory Control, brought to you by seafoodsource.com and sponsored by CAI Software. I have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we get started. If you have any technical questions, please use the chat box and I will respond right away. If you have any issues with audio, please click on the phone icon above the chat window to receive the teleconference information. For those that do need to call in, to ensure call quality, everyone's lines have been muted today. But we do want this session to be as interactive as possible. Please type your questions into the chat box and hit send to submit them. At the end of the presentation, we will have our presenters answer questions. If you are disconnected at any time, you can log on again using the instructions provided in your initial confirmation email. If you continue to experience difficulty, please email webinar@seafoodsource.com and we will respond right away. Our speakers for today are Jim Levy and Casey Coyle. With more than 30 years' experience in the seafood industry, Jim Levy has worked with a wide range of seafood processors and distributors as a salesperson for Seasoft, the industry's leading software package. Today, as a senior account manager, he works closely with seafood companies to apply best practices that increase revenues and reduce operational costs. As a result, he has a deep understanding of the challenges of seafood processors and distributors and what they do every day to drive increased sales in a world of complex customer needs. Casey Coyle, a senior consultant and project manager, has over a decade of experience implementing Food Connect solutions for food distributors and processors. In this role, he's managed on projects for John F. Martin's, Giordano, Whole Foods, and many others. Prior to Food Connects, Casey worked in customer service at Prudential Life Insurance, Fred Beans Automotive Group, and Buckingham Computers. Casey holds a BS in Management Information Systems from Penn State University. And at this time, I would like to welcome our speakers and hand the webinar off to Jim.
Thank you very much for the introduction. We'll try to hold up our end of it, being professionals. And we're going to cover some of the challenges that we find seafood companies facing when they are using QuickBooks and spreadsheets to run their business. And we've called this webinar, Overcoming the Hidden Costs of Spreadsheet-based Inventory Control. I have to say that my second job in the seafood industry was with one of the largest trading companies globally. And in spite of that, we had started out using QuickBooks and spreadsheets. We were importing pelagic fish, mostly from the Caribbean, and distributing them all over the United States from New England. We had to track each individual product because it was tuna. They could develop histamine, so we had to have lot tracking. And trying to keep all that data on a spreadsheet and keeping it accurate and up to date was a challenge. We didn't even have shared spreadsheets at that time. We could all view the spreadsheet when nobody else was in it. Can overcome some of that with Google Docs now, but it still can't be easy from talking to folks that are doing just that these days, usually smaller companies that are getting started and some bigger companies that have been at it for a long time. So with that, Casey, do you want to take off a little bit on what you've learned?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've experienced is spreadsheets have a couple of pitfalls that you can get into, and kind of the topics we want to hit up here, the lost time phenomenon, basically the amount of time that disappears into maintaining spreadsheets, usually from folks who are kind of high on the pay scale. We also have a problem where the data reliability for a spreadsheet, data can just disappear with a delete button. We'll talk about some of the ways that that's actually affected customers that we've had. When you're working with a spreadsheet, you do often end up handing the keys to the car over to someone else. Basically, the person in charge of that spreadsheet becomes in charge of that portion of the business, and often that's not the right person. It's not who you'd want to have in there. And the last thing we'll talk about is some of the ways to simplify some of the spreadsheet use through an ERP system. Now, most of the spreadsheet use we'll be talking about will be on the inventory side of things. It's where we've had a lot of experience, Jim especially, though the same can be true for using spreadsheets for things like maintaining your prices and maintaining your costs, doing your yields, that sort of stuff. Very similar concerns apply where you end up just burying all that time. Now, we don't have this scripted, by the way, just want to mention. We have rehearsed it a little bit, though. And one of the things that Jim brought up as far as the lost time is at that large company, you mentioned how much time had been spent maintaining an inventory spreadsheet. Can you give me a quick overview and kind of catch everybody else up on what that was like?
Sure. We had a small staff in spite of the volume that we managed and moved. And that office staff was small. The production floor was a busy place. And we had a bookkeeper that was in charge of, obviously, invoicing, billing, accounts receivable, et cetera. But she's also in charge of keeping spreadsheets updated. So we would receive product down on the floor, and you'd have guys handling tuna, anywhere from 40 to 200 pounders, lifting them out of boxes, weighing them, grading them, relaying that information to another guy sitting behind a laptop who's trying to put all this information in the laptop that's coming from the guys right in front of him on the floor. And it was challenging for the laptop operator to keep pace, challenging to try to enter this information at this time just onto a handwritten spreadsheet that he was keeping. And periodically, somebody would run downstairs, often me, grab the spreadsheet that Arnold was working on, run back upstairs with it, give it to the bookkeeper, and she would update the true inventory spreadsheet, if you will. So Arnold might have had a hard time writing down some of the numbers on the wet piece of paper that he's working on, and he'd be asked to help move some of the product from time to time. So the paperwork from downstairs could often be a mess. So I try to run down frequently to get it before it got too tattered for the bookkeeper to translate it. And then when it came time to selling, there was a lot of shuffling around. Can you print that spreadsheet? And it wasn't going to be up to date because as soon as she updated and printed it, they're receiving more product and shipping more product. So it was a lot of time, I'd say, on production days, which would be 3 to 5 days a week. Our bookkeeper spent most of all of her day maintaining spreadsheets. And she had to work frantically in those other couple of days to try to get any kind of money collected. Casey,
Right.
You want to add?
And oh yeah, actually, what I was going to say is that's a lot of what we see as people move from a spreadsheet-style solution over to an ERP system. Is they're looking at all that time that's being spent there. I'm going to say uselessly, and let me explain what I meant there. Is we've got someone taking a weight, taking an inventory, a case quantity or a weight quantity. They're writing it down once. That's then getting transcribed to another piece of paper to get handed off to another person to be typed into a spreadsheet. And then it sounds like even that information, because it's now out of date, it took too long to get there, is being ignored, and the sales team's running downstairs. So we have a lot of people spinning their wheels, going through the motions, updating this spreadsheet that may not even be useful to the people who need it. Now, of course, you do need it for tracking and that sort of thing, so there is a need for it to be done. But when we look at getting an ERP system in place, we want to take those users' time and start pulling out the ones that are unnecessary. So and there's our lost time phenomenon. So kind of summing it up and giving us kind of an hours to look at here, if we take in that we need someone to type in a number. We need the number to come from the scale or from the barcode and get it in the system. And they could do that in the ERP system, either hand keying it in, or they could scan it on a barcode, or we could get it straight from a scale. That's really the only time that data entry needs to happen. So from that point being done to someone running it upstairs, the bookkeeper typing it in a spreadsheet, those spreadsheets being printed out, and then someone running back downstairs to check the count because the count's too old, what would you think is kind of a fair number at the company you were looking at to say this amount of time or this many hours per day were just being wasted, when we could get it down to, just one step on an ERP.
Well, while you were going through this, I was adding it up in my head. I didn't get all the math done, but I would say the bookkeeper, 3 days a week, that's 60% of her time. On those days, she spent 80% of her time maintaining spreadsheets. On the other 2 days, she spent probably 20% of the time on that 40% of her total days, again, on spreadsheets. So
sure,
quite a bit of time.
So like a 20 to 40 hours of the bookkeeper's time? Yeah.
Probably going to be 25 to 30 hours a week that she spent maintaining spreadsheets. I got a lot of exercise running up and down stairs back then, so I was a little bit more fit and trim. And you were talking about some of the highest paid employees having to spend their time on this. My final tenure in the seafood industry in production was with a large company in New Bedford. We'll protect the names here. And I went into that company. First of all, I was with that large international trading company. We did progress from QuickBooks and spreadsheets to using a homegrown ERP system, if you will. A gentleman in town brought up a system and worked quite nicely for what we needed. But as with, I've heard the story so many times, he retired, and there's no support for that ERP system. So the large trading company moved on to another industry-specific software system. An innovative product, quite powerful. Unfortunately, that company was acquired by another company, and the support on the product is waning out. And it was a very nice product, but it's not been updated for years, and it's going to be sunsetted very soon. So I moved on to a couple other seafood companies. The final one, believe it or not, I was back to QuickBooks and spreadsheets, and it was a horror show. We quickly migrated to another industry standard ERP system that is still around, but it was lacking in the yields. Casey mentioned somebody had to keep track of yields. Again, I was dealing in pelagics, sword and tuna, and we'd have quite a bit of fish that were cut into loins. And because of the inadequacies of the ERP system we were using, I always kept a spreadsheet. Being one of the highest paid employees at the facility, I kept a spreadsheet of every fish that was cut, where the pieces of loin went to get the yields and get the total value for that fish based upon the parts of it that were sold. And I'd say once a month, the owner of the company would call me up to his office. What the hell are you doing? You sold this swordfish, you're paying $6 for it, and you only sold it $4 a pound. That's because all the loins aren't added up. I'd have to go through it and show him the spreadsheet that I kept to keep my backside covered as it be. Oh, well, that looks better. But
yeah,
again, here I am, one of the highest paid guys in the plant, keeping spreadsheets. So, waste of time.
And actually, Jim, a little bit of time wasted there. And I'm going to say, let's skip ahead to 2 clicks on our set there, because you brought up a good topic. Handing the car keys to someone else. So the owner of the company, it sounds like, is calling you up to challenge the information he has available to him or her. And when you present your spreadsheet, the ownership of the data means that the salesperson, you, and not to contest that you weren't doing what you should have been doing, but the salesperson knew more about the inventory than the owner of the company does. And that's one of the big concerns here is if we're working with spreadsheets, you end up with small pieces of the company being owned by not the management team. Now, you were probably part of the management team at that point if you're one of the higher paid folks, but it's not in the structure.
Yes, I was.
Okay. And that's one of those things that we see with other companies is, especially I see it a lot when there's acquisitions. Someone will, they'll have a provision store and they'll pick up a sausage manufacturer and they'll bring that in. And then there's almost like a little subset within the company because they, brought over some of the employees from that sausage manufacturer. They do the inventory, they maintain their own set, but it's almost its own set of books within the higher company, and nobody really knows what's going on either side. And that can lead to problems. In your case, it was, why are you selling stuff too cheap? In other cases, it can be, why are you walking out the door with stuff, or why are you selling stuff too expensive, or where's all that profit coming from? So it's a real big concern with spreadsheets there. Now, on an ERP side, what you want to have in place are the processes and the tracking that you need so that you can always go back and figure out how the numbers got from where they were to what they are and who's responsible for it. So part of getting the control of the company back is allowing the ownership and the management team to set processes in an ERP and follow the best practices in the industry so that it's always done the same way every time, and you have control over it. We've implemented a process based on best practices and based on what you need for a particular company that you can stick to, and you can't change as easily as you change a formula in a spreadsheet because now these are standards that we want to meet as compared to we just made it work this time. So we skipped ahead a little bit here, but I'm kind of glad you brought it up that way. Do we want to go back a little bit and talk about that data void, though?
Yeah, why don't we do that? And just,
okay.
If anybody joined late, I was just going to let you know, bring up the speed here, that we're talking two sides of the conversation, obviously. I am coming from the hands-on, boots to the ground guy working in dead fish for years, and Casey's coming at it as a project manager that implements ERP systems. So we both see a different side of the picture. Actually, we see the same picture, just different ways, different experiences with it. I saw the problems building, and Casey's on the other side repairing those by implementing ERP systems. I've had the luxury of using the ERP systems while I was running around with wet feet, and I know the pros and cons of the operation. Casey knows how to put them into service for you.
Yeah, I usually see the problems and go, how in the world did we get here? You at least got to see how they got there.
Oh, yeah.
So, and that's actually one of the things that, how did we get here is usually there's a catastrophe somewhere shortly before people start getting me involved and, start looking into ERP systems because something went wrong. And a lot of times what that is kind of what we have up on screen here. Your data reliability is not there. People think that their shrink is too high. People think that their yields are too low. People can't figure out why the profitability is wrong. And a lot of that can be tracked back to an inadequate tool. A spreadsheet's great, but it's only as good as the data you're throwing into it, and it's only as secure as who has access to it. And Jim, you had mentioned in one of the earlier conversations we had about some of the folks that had bumped into that situation where, there was money missing that as soon as you saw the ERP, it started to show up. Actually, that was on your side, on the implementation side.
That was. Yes. We had implemented CSoft for a company down in New York City. Nice little company, smart guy behind the wheel of the ship. And he didn't have CSoft implemented for more than a few weeks, and he called us up and said, my gosh, I can't believe this. I had to let go of my GM. He was probably blind downstairs in the production room. I didn't know it until I was able to track the yields and see what's going on. And there I was working for a very large company in New Bedford, and I had control of the production yields. I knew what was going on. I knew where all the product went. Mm-hmm. How easy would it have been for me to cook the books as a bee and have a little side business selling loins on my own? So
yeah, you don't want to think about it, but that is one of those risks that's in there. Is on a spreadsheet, a delete is pretty easy. You can change a number pretty easily, And of course, now if you are using a spreadsheet now, make sure you've got what tracking you can turned on, you've got what security you can turned on. But usually, whether you're using Google Docs or Excel or things like that, it's only as secure as the people who have access to it. And when you're looking at more of an ERP solution, what you want to do is have those processes so that the people can only access what they need to. Someone who's doing production should really only be able to produce product. They shouldn't be able to do things like edit costs or maybe go in and do a physical. And that's where a ERP system is going to give you a workstation to do the entry. It's going to speed you up, so you've saved yourself time. But it's also going to lock down what the person can do so that you can't just erase a number at the end of the day or delete an invoice at the end of the day without that tracking being in there. And that's where we talk about those data reliability voids, is that you can just lose it. The other piece is usually with spreadsheets, spreadsheets get associated along with some stack of paper somewhere, and that's something that I've seen a number of times. Is you've got your spreadsheet log going on in your inventory, but then in a pile you've got either vendor invoices or you've got labels that are torn off of things, and you've got all that data just sitting there in a pile of paperwork because no one could take the time to get it into a spreadsheet. So things like serial numbers, lot numbers, expiration dates, all that stuff that you need to track, they're tracking it by just having a physical stack because they don't have the speed to get it really into the system. So it's kind of useless come recall time because you've got to literally flip through that stack of stickers or whatever you've got cut out there to pull out the information you want. Jim, how are you guys handling that aspect with some of those companies you were at?
I'm sitting here cringing. We had our rudimentary ways of keeping track of things. We'd have little manila tags fastened to the sides of fish, and when they got sold, we'd pull that tag off the fish and staple to a pick ticket. Mm-hmm. And, if a guy ordered 20 fish, you'd have 20 little not index cards, little shipping tags stapled all over the side of a piece of paper, and it was covered with tuna juice and ice and everything else. So you'd end up filing that in a stack of paperwork somewhere. And if somebody called back and said, yeah, I had a problem with one of the fish. Oh, which one? So you got to go digging through and pull out all that paperwork that now is dried, crusty, and still smells pleasant. You couldn't notice it anyway. We're all in a fish plant. But dig through it, find the one that was a problem, and get the tracking information, because that tracking information didn't always make it onto the invoice. It didn't really have to make it on the invoice because we weren't doing shellfish. Now, with the requirement to have all that tracking information that somebody's feverishly writing down on the production floor, have that information spit out onto a sales invoice, it doesn't always get there, and it doesn't get there accurately. And
oh yeah,
I know that from the simpler tracking we were doing compared to what's required by law now with seafood traceability. But whatever.
And that's kind of the callback to the earlier conversation about the time. Things like those shellfish tags, things like the country of origin, which I know has been pushed back for a lot of products now, and eventually it'll come back around again. But all that recording that folks are doing to spreadsheets or to manual logs, if we can get that down into an ERP system, either by bringing that in off of a scan, ideally off of a scan, because that's just one beep on a scanner, or if necessary, doing that manual entry one time into the system, then we can carry all that data forward through everything that you do, all the way through to the sales. So doing like mock recalls or doing inquiries into lots becomes, one or two buttons instead of digging through the whole stack. And it's kind of a mean joke around the office, but a lot of times when people are coming on board, when we start talking to them about, recall readiness and mock recalls and that sort of thing, the almost common answer across the board is, yeah, we just recall the whole day, because there is no subdivision or tracking within that day. And we're like, no, you're going to do it a better way. We're going to talk to you about how you can track back to the box, instead of just having that big long list either on the spreadsheet or on the log that has all that data on it that you just can't get out. You've lost it.
And something we didn't go over in our rehearsals, but while you're talking about the data, I think by now most everybody knows that data is king, and there's always a disjoint between a spreadsheet where you're keeping your inventory data and whatever you're using for your accounting and invoice generating software. And that disjoint is a loss of data, if you will, that's not usable to you. You can't do an accurate sales report and look at sales trends and really analyze the business and see, where am I making a lot of money? Where am I not making any money? How can I improve my business? And that's a big thing. It's data reliability void. It's not reliability. It's just a data void. You don't have access to use data because it's disjointed between where the sale actually happened and where the invoice or the inventory actually came in. And you can't do an accurate analysis without that data.
Yeah,
so
and that's where
the ERP system certainly solves that.
I was going to say that. So for folks who are hearing us throw around the word ERP, I'm sure you know enterprise resource planning, but usually the way I like to use the word is just as long as your systems are tied together. You'll find ERP packages that are all in one, where the inventory, the accounting, and everything is just one piece of software. You'll find ERP systems where it's 2 or 3 pieces of software that work together well. And whichever style you choose, what you want to make sure is they're working together well, as compared to we do it in one spot and then we transfer a portion of that data to another spot. That's where you've got those disjointed systems where, yeah, we've got a spreadsheet and we've got QuickBooks, but the translation between them is somebody handwriting or hand typing. That's not an ERP. That's just, 2 different systems. But if we can get those tied together, it is a little bit of a mess. So that's kind of where we talk about our data reliability void. We did talk about the next slide a little bit, handing the car keys to someone else. Is there anything else that we wanted to expand on the car keys? You kind of led into it pretty well, with the manager team there, the deleting, tracking of the system, of course.
I was going to say it's so easy for somebody to be sitting there on a phone with their hand on a mouse, and you kind of unconsciously hit that left key down and slide the mouse across, and now you've just highlighted a whole bunch of data. And if you're not paying attention, it can be gone in a heartbeat. And depending if you scroll down accidentally while you're just sitting there mindlessly holding the mouse in your hand and talking on the phone, it could be a whole spreadsheet that you've just highlighted. And one little click of the finger, it's gone. And trying to rebuild that information is near impossible.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can lose a lot of data that way.
And that leads us into a simpler way. Oh, go ahead.
That does, but before we get there, I just wanted to mention, because you did touch on something early on, talking about growing out of Excel to kind of a customized or a homebrew sort of situation. That's another way you can actually give away control of your company, is by tying in to small customizations where you start to lose control of things, or you start to reinforce bad habits. And this is one that I see a lot on the implementation side, is people have gone so far down the rabbit hole in one direction of the way they do things. They come up with very creative workarounds for what there are solutions in a kind of best practices situation. Some of the folks, as we bring them on board with the ERP systems, they'll have 15 to 20 different ways to do rebates between 3 or 4 customers. I'm remembering a couple in particular where they could do it all with one way, but because the person who was in charge at that time had a preferred way to do it, or a different style spreadsheet, so some would have a discount on the gross profit, some would have a discount on the sale amount, some would have a discount based on how they paid, and all these different ways had got them locked into some very complicated spreadsheets that when we started talking to them about, they couldn't really dig themselves out of that hole. We had to do a lot of work with them to break the bad habits of all the different ways that things had been done over the years, instead of coming with the best way and kind of sticking with it. Which then kind of leads us to the simpler way, is with the ERP, you're going to be working with folks that have dedicated time and energy to finding the best practices in the industry. I've got, 10, 11 years under my belt doing it. Jim, I know you've got a couple of years under your belt as well.
Yeah, I'm older.
I was going to say it, and then we've got all the other talented folks working with the companies that are coming up with these projects for food distributors, food processors, seafood distributors, seafood processors, and kind of taking all that information from all the different companies that we've worked with, refining that down to a simplified and kind of straightforward way to do things. And that's where it does seem intimidating at first, because any change, no matter how good or bad it is, any change is uncomfortable. So when people are like, oh, but our spreadsheet is super simple, it's probably only because you're used to it. It's usually not super simple. And that's where we find that, kind of like you described, where you've got a person writing something down, you've got a person transcribing it, you got a person running it upstairs, somebody putting it in a spreadsheet, somebody taking the spreadsheet information back downstairs to compare it. When you say it out loud, that's 5 or 6 or 7 steps, but people will tell you that that's super simple as compared to a one-step situation. I think
and
one is less than 5.
CAI is gifted to have project managers and software engineers like Casey on the team, because they are so knowledgeable about the food industry that I know some of our engineers have had people ask them, they're out on a production floor helping setting up a scale interface to capture data right from a scale. And somebody on a production floor would turn and say, how long have you been in the seafood industry? And I've never been in the seafood industry. I'm a software engineer by trade. And they're just like amazed that these people have such great knowledge of the industry that you're not talking to some cute computer engineer with you see Casey doesn't have a little spinner hat on top of his head. He understands what's going on the food production floor, and he can talk the language with you and help you come to a solution of what's going to work best for your company.
Sure. I will happily admit I know more about bacon than I know about fish. That's where my I've slid on more bacon floors than I have on fish floors, but I have slid on a few fish floors. I learned early on
slippery.
not to wear the dress shoes. They are both slippery. That was one of my founding moments there, as I first went out with Paul HC, first couple of days on the job forever ago. As we're walking around, like 30 or 40 times, he told me, be careful, it's slippery, be careful, it's slippery, be careful. I'm like, I know. I understand how slippery. Whoop! And down I went. So had to learn that one. Sorry, I went off topic. Getting back to it though, when we're talking about a simpler way, what we're looking for here is, looking at what's grown up organically in your company and trying to get that simplified down. And even if you don't decide to go with an ERP system solution now, take a hard look at what you're doing with your spreadsheets and what's kind of grown up, because as businesses grow, different people are in charge of different projects, and you'll end up with, one person's spreadsheet and another person's spreadsheet and another person's spreadsheet, all doing the same stuff or similar jobs. And with a little thought, you could probably squeeze that down into one system. ERP system, somebody's already put in the time and effort for you there, so you can take advantage of that. We've been working at these for a long time. We think we're pretty good at it, but if you want to take a shot at it, at least try and avoid letting it continue to branch. And that's where growth companies are kind of at the biggest risk, because they'll pick up new lines of business, especially now. Almost everybody's reinvented their business. I can't tell you how many customers I've talked to recently that are now offering curbside, or they're now offering boxed offerings direct to consumer, or they're changing how they're doing their packaging because the restaurants are changing how they're doing their usage. So as all this is evolving, I'm thrilled to be able to say, hey, we already had a customer doing that, so we already have the practices. You just have to do it. So here you go. But if you're working off a spreadsheet, you're going to invent your own new way to do a thing. And just be careful how many new ways to invent things you come up with.
Yes, that's very true. I just want to say that along those lines, what I've seen going on is some companies are handing off to the next generation, if you will. Some companies are being acquired by larger companies. And with that change, you got a younger kid in there. I'm an old guy. But he comes in, he's college educated, generally speaking. He's used computers since he was in his crib playing with his dad's phone or whatever. So they're very comfortable with technology and very aware of the power of data. And I spoke earlier about the loss of the data that's useful to you between a spreadsheet and your accounting software. So we see a lot of companies, some that are being acquired, and they bring in powerful management teams, and they want data. They want to be able to see the data, track what's going on, see where we're making money. You hand off the younger generation, again, they want to come in. They've gone to school for 4 years and worked with data, and they crave this data. They know that that's how they can grow their business. And at the risk of my job security, some of the old guys with gray hair get pushed out because, I've always done it this way and it works really well. Well, you know what? Charcoal and paper used to work really well years ago, but we've grown up now. We're actually using ink and pens, and we're actually using these little buttons in front of us all the time. It just, it's evolution. And you've got to keep current with the evolution of how business practices change and how business awareness change of, gosh, I got to start selling curbside pickup because that's the only way I'm going to survive. And lo and behold, Casey said, Chris, yeah, we already have people doing that from years ago. That was their business model, and we already have the technology to facilitate that and make it simple for you and keep track of it and know what you're doing. Yeah, great. I'm doing curbside pickup. There's a lot of meat disappearing, but is it making money for me?
Fair.
Kind of important to know.
I haven't even thought about it. So you just mentioned it with the younger generations coming in and wanting data. There's other people who want data too, and they don't like spreadsheets. Like banks. A lot of our folks, report to investors. They report to banks. They need to report on inventory. And when your only way to track inventory is to show them a spreadsheet that says, "Hey, here's a count, and here's how we think it adds up," they're not thrilled. So
find another bank.
Yeah, that's not awesome all the time, and so that's where the ERP systems, or at least consolidating your spreadsheets, comes in. So I think we're getting close to the point where we want to tap to the next one and kind of talk about who we are, and then probably do our little trade-off to get some question time in here.
Good. Yeah, I was looking at the clock, thinking that we got to keep track of where we are.
Give time for questions.
So,
absolutely.
I don't know if any questions have come in, but again, Casey is a project manager with CEI. I'm an account manager. I go out and find you, and then we turn you over to Casey to make things better. How's that?
That's totally fair. Though I do get involved with the demo, so you won't be surprised if you hear from me or some of the other support folks as we're talking, so you can hear about some of the stuff that we've done on the floor already. So Jim's contact information up, and so everybody, do please take some time to get your questions in. I know we'll have our host pop in here. I think she just highlighted in.
Yeah, and she can take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim and Casey, for a great presentation. We are now moving into our Q&A session. As a reminder, if you have not already done so, please enter your questions using the chat box and hitting send to submit them. And our first question today is, how easy is it to pull data from the ERP into a spreadsheet for in-depth analysis using separate advanced analytics software?
You want me to take that? You want to take that?
So the short answer is it's pretty easy.
Yes.
Longer answer is it'll depend on which systems we're talking about. I believe everything we do we can dump out to an Excel spreadsheet, depending on which ERP solution we're talking about. We do have some database access versus timed Excel, and a lot of our applications will have detailed inquiries built into them. So yes, you can definitely put out from a solid ERP system to a spreadsheet to do additional slicing and dicing, but you want to make sure that
advanced tools.
Yeah,
there are more advanced
you
tools
do want
in
to.
Excel spreadsheet that we can offer as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of it. Is we want to make sure that whatever ERP you're using shows you the data in the way you want it easily, usually on screen. So common requests, what's my top sellers, what's my most profitable, what's my least profitable, what's a trend look like? That sort of stuff usually you want to have your ERP system just serve up to you. If we're talking a little more detail, something where you really got to dig, sure, then out to an Excel.
Yes, and I know we refer to that as ODBC compliant. I don't recall what those letters stand for anymore. I used to know. But again, I have gray hair. And that means that you can have your ERP system talk to another data crunching system and pull data out and then crunch it in your other system if you'd like to. That system could be Excel. It could be, we call it Excel on steroids. It's another system that we can integrate into CSoft to pull the data out. It's already formatted, and then it's really easy and really powerful to get into data, more so than what we present on screen. All of our systems do have hundreds of built-in reports that you can display on screen, export into Excel, work on the way you're used to, or if your younger generation comes in from college and needs to dig into more data, we have solutions for that too.
Sure.
Anything else on questions?
Yes, I have another question. What methods of forecasting is the CAI CSoft using? For example, exponential smoothing, moving averages, regression, etc.
You want to start that one, Casey?
So for CSoft specifically, I'm not sure which calculation option you are using. So that one I would bounce either back to you, Jim, or ask for them to get that one answered properly in a demo. On the Food Connect side, most of our predictions are done off of a weighted average, depending on which style we're talking about. On the Food Connect side, we usually use a 7-week weighted average for things like sales, projections, purchasing, that sort of thing. And for CSoft, I'm not sure. I've seen the screen, but I don't know what the math was behind it.
In CSoft, we have Purchase Assist, which is you can plug in what was, or last year's numbers that we plugged in for you, what you sold. And if you're anticipating 10% growth this year, you can up all those figures by 10%. You can do it by category, et cetera. So you can kind of forecast what you expect to be bringing in and moving this year. If it's something more specific forecasting, we do have for recipe processing, we have complete MRP to go in and take a look at, I need to produce X number of units of this recipe that I have to put together. So it'll forecast for you with the lead time on products that need to come in, what do you already have on inventory, when have you got to push that button to order more product to make sure you can produce the units that are in the system. So we do have some good forecasting tools in there. It depends upon exactly what you're looking for. If you want to give me a call, I can certainly dig down deeper and get better answers for you.
Excellent, thank you. Another question, where does CAI CSoft hold the yield relationship?
Where do we hold the yield relationship? The real yield, we can work with actual yields or standard yields. The actual yields are done as a production forecast is complete, or not forecast, the production run is completed. We enter in, you scan into the production room, here's the weight of product that's going into production. As you're weighing that product out, taking it over scale and capturing the weights, if they're catch weights or standard weights, whatever, you tally up the final weight. That yield is then stored with the production order. So on any given day, you can look at your cod production versus your swordfish production, see what the yields were. Or if you're working, a lot of our customers cut to order, so they're not necessarily taking the time to say, okay, I grabbed 30 pounds of grouper to cut up 12 pounds of fillet, and taking the time to scan in which grouper got cut and how much weight went back out. They're just pulling fish and cutting it. So we can work automatically with a standard yield that's going to say, okay, my yield's about 36%, so to produce 12 pounds of fillet, I'm going to need just shy of 40 pounds of whole fish. CSOF will go in as soon as somebody sells that 12 pounds of fillet and it's acknowledged that it just went out on the sales order. It'll go in, adjust the inventory, pull out 40 pounds of the primal product, i.e. the whole fish, and deduct that from inventory, add the fillet product to inventory, and then ship that fillet product back out on that sales order. So we have several ways to store the information based on an item predicted yield, or we can get the actual yields just by somebody recording the information. Some of that is automated by barcode scanning on both sides of the production line. If that didn't answer the question as it was intended, please give me a call. Be happy to go over it with you. I am afraid to say I've got a lot more knowledge on it than that, but I'll stay away from trying to explain right now.
Yeah, you could go on for a while on that one.
Yes, I could.
Thanks, Jim. And another question, what has CSoft found to be the most challenging coming into a company?
Ooh, well, there are several things. Casey alluded to it, so did I. It's going to be change. Whatever you're using now for a system, there's going to be change because we are not going to work exactly the same as your other product that you're using, or if it's still a spreadsheet and an accounting system, there's going to be change. For some people, the change is something they look to get. You've got the guys that want to get data, they're willing to learn something new, they want to do it. Then you've got the guy that's looking at retiring in a year or two, and he doesn't have the energy to want to learn something new. And we've had challenges with that kind of implementation where you've got folks that just don't want to learn something new. I've been writing up orders on a piece of paper for years and years, and I'm not going to change. That's the way I do it. Well, that doesn't work. Somebody's got to get that information into your ERP system so you can get some analysis out of it. Other challenges that we see.
Well, I got one for you. Okay.
I was just trying to think of some of the worst ones. You know, we try not to change business practices. We have a lot of flexibility that, you know, we're not going to allow the guy to keep using his pen and pencil on a piece of paper, so that's a change. But when it comes down to production, you'll hear us during the demo, somebody will ask me, how do you manage this part? Well, how are you doing it now? And we have so many solutions built into the software that we just configure it to try to keep it close to what you're doing now so that you don't have this gross change throughout the whole manufacturing process, and everybody's got to learn it because some of you guys down on the production floor, I used to work with a lot of guys that they were immigrants. English was a second language. And for some, change was hard. For some, it was easy. It was sometimes easier if I went down to the floor to ask what was going on with an inbound shipment. What's going on? They could show me in the software easier than they could translate to English and explain it to me. So
sure.
It depends upon the personnel on the floor, and you're going to need probably a project leader. We call it a software expert, if you will, that somebody that's going to embrace the project and want to learn the product being the ERP system, whether it's CSoft, Food Connects, or Provisions, just learn it inside and out. So you need somebody that's familiar with the production downstairs, somebody that has an idea of what's going on in the accounting office too. Somebody like me that's worked on the floor and has an MBA and can kind of put the two together and understand it would be ideal, but I'm sorry, I'm employed already. Go ahead, Casey. You said you had something to add to that.
Oh, yeah. So it's kind of related to change, but to kind of tie it back to the spreadsheet issue, trust is the other one. Jim, I know, way back when at the big company, if you wanted to really know how much inventory you had, you'd run downstairs and look. You wouldn't trust
Absolutely.
the system.
Absolutely.
And everyone gets trained when they're doing the spreadsheets that, yeah, the spreadsheets is behind by half an hour. It's not quite right. That's a big habit to break when I'm coming in and we're saying, no, you're just going to look at the system and that's the right information. It's done in real time. That's super hard to pound into people's head after they've been through 15, 20 years of not being able to trust their system. So that's one of those reasons why when we talk about, spreadsheets kind of creep in there and make their own problems. Once that spreadsheet's gotten into someone's head that they can't trust the numbers on the spreadsheet, it's really hard to get them to say, okay, well, we're going to give this other, what we think of as just a glorified spreadsheet in the ERP system, another try and trust it with inventory and sales and cost and profitability without spending the extra time to go down and double check. Now, of course, for like the first 2 or 3 weeks as people are getting used to things and making mistakes, yeah, double check. But getting them to break that habit so that they really do free up their time and stop, maintaining their little logbooks and that sort of stuff, it's hard. So I think that's a big thing. And having a point person like you talked about, having buy-in from the management team to say, yes, we're gonna. This is the new Bible. This is the new thing we're looking at. To maintain the inventory. We're no longer looking at that list that's tacked up on the wall. We're no longer having the production team go out and count boxes because they shouldn't be doing that. That should already be done for them, and they should just look at this number that's coming out of the system and know it's accurate. And that's hard.
And just one final point, if I can throw it out there. By the time a company makes a decision to buy a system, regardless of what system it is, they have looked at a lot of demos. They've got an understanding of how it works. They can see this is going to improve my business. Don't fall into the pitfall of, yes, this is going to improve my business, and when they come up here and do the training for me, I'm not going to pay any attention to the training. It's going to improve your business when you know how to use it. And the best implementations are the ones where people pay attention to the training and they do their homework. Homework means, okay, Casey just spent an hour with me on the phone. We went over all this stuff. I was doing it while he was talking me through it. Now I'm going to practice it because next week, Casey's not going to be, entering the order for me. I'm going to be entering the order when somebody calls in. So just the folks that pay attention to the training and do their homework, it's very successful. We have very good success. We've had some challenge horror shows when people just don't get it because, oh, yeah, I'm in here, I'm in training. Oh, wait a minute, I got a phone call. This guy always buys 20 pounds of fish. I got to get him on the phone. 20 pounds of fish can wait. You've got to go through the training.
Excellent. Thank you. And you may have just touched on this a little bit, but the next question is, what are some best practices you have experienced during implementation in terms of ERP transitions?
Best practices that we've implemented or best practices to get it implemented? Best practice getting implemented is know that you're going to have to do your homework, pay attention to the training. Yep. That I have to drill that in. We've, best practice, Casey just said you don't have to go down and count boxes. When product is received, not everybody's used to labeling boxes or barcode scanning the boxes that already have a barcode label on it and putting their inventory together right from the get-go. All the food industry now, traceability is important. And you have to know where the product came from and where it went. That all starts at the time of receipt. If you can capture that information on that box when it comes into your plant, everything else makes it simple after that because especially if you're using warehouse management with barcode scanning, somebody's scanning it, all the information travels everywhere that box gets scanned to. And with a food recall, God forbid you have it, but it happens. And for how do we do on the shipment, to do an analysis, what vendors am I making more money from than others because of the quality of their product. There's so much information, and it all starts when you receive the product into inventory and know what's what once it goes in the cooler. And I think that's a key best practice that people have to get used to. It's not that hard. Most people are weighing their fish in anyway, but
Sure.
do they know what happens to it after that? Casey, go ahead. I know you want to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, actually, as far as the implementation itself goes, implementations for ERP systems that we do, you're going to get an implementation plan that's going to give you a timeline kind of laying out, based on days, based on weeks, based on months, here's what's expected to happen. You want to make sure you put someone in charge of that, and you want to understand that your business is not going to hold still while you do this. Emergencies come up, coronavirus comes up, something happens. You're just going to push through it and stay on target. Having a little bit of personnel available for it is key. You're not going to be able to implement a new system while everybody's running at 110% capacity. You don't want to hire on somebody brand new, though, generally, to handle an implementation because they're not going to be familiar with the business. Generally, what you want to do is, if you need one, hire on an assistant, hire on someone to free up someone on the management team to work with us. Get
Right.
somebody in there to help with the bookkeeping, help with the inventory, help with whatever the little stuff is that those key people are running around doing that can be shoved off for a little while. Those are the people we want to work with, because the more the management team, the more buy-in we get at the higher level, the easier it flows down. Because it's very hard, and we've run into this and we've gotten through it, but it's very difficult working with someone who doesn't have product knowledge, customer knowledge to set up products and customers. They're asking questions to us that we then have to ask to the management team, and becomes kind of a cycle through. Yeah, get your plan together. Have a little personnel available, and then stick with it through all the craziness that's going to happen, because you're going to get a new customer who's going to need a new order of some crazy amount. You're going to change production. Equipment's going to break. Whatever's going to happen, just bear through. Of course, we'll work with you on that. So, schedules are flexible. We'll work with it. But don't let it get pushed off. Keep up on the front end, because it will free up your time as soon as you're done.
In case you touched on pandemics are happening, and I've got to say, I've been working from home, and it's been surprisingly busy. There are people that recognize we're not working at 110% right now. I've wanted to address a new system, and you know what? I've got the time to do my due diligence, because you're not going to look at C software provisions and Proof Connects and say, yeah, I'm all set. You might want to compare it to other products that are out there. I often encourage that. So I look to have you make the right choice for your company. And sure, I'd like you to buy my product because I make more money that way. But if that's not the best decision, I don't want you to decide on our product. I don't want to mismatch. So this might be a time to, if you've been thinking about a system and you're not operating at 110%, I can't imagine you are, might be a good time to start looking, so that we will come out of this pandemic. We will get back to normal somehow. And when we get there, you'll be geared up and ready to go.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. Let's see. In general, where do you see the greatest cost savings / efficiencies / ROI when moving to an ERP solution?
There's a lot of them. It's difficult to quantify each one, but there are going to be cost savings and efficiencies from transcribing data from a box to a sales invoice, efficiencies in moving product into production, the accuracies that you pick up once you go to that barcode labeling, the accuracy is just night and day different, believe me. Don't ask me why I know that. You're going to find you could be like the gentleman in New York that, oh my gosh, I'm getting robbed blind over here. And it happened again with another company in Massachusetts. It's when you can really see the data that's driving your business, driving the profits, there are a million little leaks that you're not even aware of, that once you can look at the data, and I'm back on that data again, once you can see it, you can address it, and you can start plugging those little holes. And a very large company that's using CSoft, one of their first reports was our shipping accuracy has increased so much that we're not messing around with mistakes in shipping, returns, et cetera, et cetera. And that was, there's a white paper on our website about it, that they just couldn't believe how quickly from the implementation date, within a couple of weeks, they could see the improvement that quickly. So it's things you're not even aware of that you're going to improve upon, and you start adding them all up, and the return on investment is going to be there.
Yeah,
Casey,
absolutely. I was just trying to think through, like, what that last thing you mentioned. One of our customers recently went through that. They would be issuing 5 to 10 credit memos every day, where basically a box had been recorded as shipped, but it wasn't shipped, or a weight was wrong. And once they got the Food Connect system implemented, that went down to 0, because now everything was scanned and everything was out the door. Now, that's not a huge cost savings. I mean, it only takes, 15, 20 minutes to write out the credit memos. But they just went from an unreliable vendor, somebody who you always have to call to correct your stuff, to being a reliable vendor. Now there are no corrections happening. So, I mean, the number that I usually use when we're talking about stuff to give people an idea is usually about 30% business volume. So if you're looking at what you're doing today and you bring an ERP system in, you can usually handle about 30% more volume, assuming you've got the trucks and the warehouse space and that sort of stuff to handle it, at about the same amount of personnel. So that's what we kind of look at as the metric, because usually our implementations, you're going to pick up a lot of time saved between the inventory, between the shipping and the invoicing, that you can get more stuff out the door with the same number of people. And of course, you have to do the sales. You got to make the sales to get that to happen. But it frees up a lot of availability, a lot of management time, and carries it through. And absolutely, you do pick up real costs in shrink and better yields and better profitability tracking, and your pricing gets more accurate and that sort of stuff. But I think that overall, it's just the ability to handle more growth within your business is where an ERP really shines. Is, you can go from being at 110% capacity, get the ERP in there, and now you're back down to 70% capacity. You can grow another 30% to get you back up before you have to buy, the next new warehouse or whatever it's going to be.
That's right. And the data with the analytics is very significant also. An oversimplified example, well, first off, returns are better because product, if you have a mispick and it comes back, somebody just scans it when the truck gets back in, it goes right back in inventory, and it's the right product, everything, all the information's there, it's all correct. So your returns are actually easier, they're better recorded, and if there's a disposition that came back, had to be thrown out, you can put those reason codes in. And
sure.
I'll give you an oversimplified example of an analytic that when I worked in New Bedford, we run a route truck out to Cape Cod, seasonal truck out to the islands, et cetera, et cetera. And there's one guy in particular that always called. He was a friend of the owner. He had to have harpoon swordfish. And you didn't need analytics to figure this out. I'm giving it to you because it's oversimplified. You get a harpoon fish in, and then, he'd fight for the price and always call back and take a credit on weight because there's a hole in the fish. And you know what? That's something that happens when you harpoon a fish. It's hard to stick it without making a hole somewhere in that fish. Occasionally there's a headshot, but it's rare. Guys don't aim for the head. It's an accident. So it was quite simple to see that this guy is getting away with murder because, I bought a 150-pound fish. I'm taking 10 pounds of credit. What's his price now? And what did you make on it? And that's very simple. I didn't need an analytic get in an argument with the owner and say, what are we doing? This is like stupid. Right. But you can see that you start tracking reason codes. Why did somebody take credit? Why did he send it back? And I can see, this is my biggest customer. Man, I sell him a ton of stuff. You start looking underneath it at the reasons that he's taking credits and stuff. Wow, he's taking a pile of fish and I'm making 2.5% on it. I can't live on 2.5%. This has got to change. So
Yep.
You're probably not aware of that, but you're leaking. And we all know when a ship takes on water, it doesn't stay afloat very well. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And thank you, Jim and Casey. That was great. We are just about out of time. Before we say goodbye, I do just have a few items to cover. As a reminder, watch for our follow-up email in the next 3 business days, providing you with information as to how to access the recording and download the materials. We would love to hear your feedback on today's session. When closing the meeting window, a short survey will pop up. We'd love to hear your feedback, which will help us in developing future webinars. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us. This webinar was brought to you by seafoodsource.com and sponsored by CAI Software. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
And thank you for putting up with us on our unscripted webinar that we just sat here and entertained each other, and hopefully you didn't all fall asleep. Thanks again for your time and consideration.
Thanks, everybody.